Welcome to episode 2 of God's Timing and a Good Book. I'm Pastor Rick McGee from Joyful Life Ministries. I'm here to share another story with you today of a time when God brought a person with a good book into my life, and it was such a blessing to me. Each time we come together and share another episode, another story or testimony, I hope to do two things. I hope each time will be an opportunity to share a good resource with you, introduce you, or remind you of a good book that you may want to check out. Also, taking an opportunity each time to thank the people that have allowed themselves to be used by God to be a blessing to others. Today, on episode 2, I want to start by introducing you to a person early in my life who allowed God to use them in one of the first opportunities for God's timing and a good book in my life. That person was my second grade teacher, Miss Jane Ledbetter. Miss Ledbetter had a challenging time with me in her second grade class at Southside Elementary School. I was a very hyperactive kid. I was a class clown. I do remember it seemed like every day getting my name on the board and X's beside my name as the bad behavior added up. I remember having a tough time sitting still, being quiet, all those difficulties. And yet I do remember so clearly Miss Ledbetter doing some things that year that directed the course of my life and put some love for things into me that year that have stayed with me all through my life. So I want to start by introducing you to Miss Ledbetter a little bit today. She was a fantastic person and teacher. She clearly had a connection, a walk with God. She did some things back then that I think were very unique even for that time, but even more so in these days. One of the things Miss Ledbetter did each morning, she would come into class with a big smile, just filled with joy, and she would sing very loudly, very energetically, "Good morning to you, good morning to you." And she always did it with such passion and joy. And looking back, I realized what a miracle that was, because she knew every day she was going to walk into class that year, and I was going to be sitting there presenting new challenges and new difficulties, and yet she still came in with joy and still came in ready to start over each new day. The other thing she did was pray with us every day before we dismissed for lunch. She would pray and bless our food. There were so many unique things about Miss Ledbetter. And I remember on the playground, students early in the year would compare our teachers and talk about who we had and what they did and what a difference they had from each other. Miss Ledbetter just really stood out among all of the teachers in our comparisons. So as I said, I was challenging that year. And one day Miss Ledbetter walked in class and picked up this particular book, Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. On that day, she started reading, and I was immediately captivated by this classic story. And I know many of you may have read this as a kid, may have read it to your kids, but as all great books are, this one is worth going back to over and over again. There was something about it that connected with me, and I'm sure Miss Ledbetter noticed that I seemed to get quiet, and suddenly I could sit still and my attention was focused. And this particular book about Charlotte and Wilbur and Templeton, it caught my attention. And I want to talk about a couple of the things that it did. E.B. White, of course, is a great author and had written many humorous articles and many magazine articles. Went on to write guides to writing and style and grammar. But for me, this was the book that started everything with my love for E.B. White as an author. And Miss Ledbetter would read a little bit each day, and I was hooked. So I thought maybe I would just read one excerpt from it today, just as a reminder in case it's been a while since you have visited this story. And at this point in the story, Wilbur has been moved away from his home, and he's been moved to a farm where Fern's uncle lives, and he's pinned in, but he's not happy. He's not content. And the goose tells him that he can escape from the farm and go out and enjoy his freedom. So that's where we'll begin today. After all, Wilbur was a very young pig, not much more than a baby, really. He wished Fern were there to take him in her arms and comfort him. When he looked up and saw Mr. Zuckerman standing quite close to him, holding a pail of warm slops, he felt relieved. He lifted his nose and sniffed. The smell was delicious. Warm milk, potato skins, wheat middlings, Kellogg's cornflakes, and a popover left from the Zuckerman's breakfast. Now, Wilbur has been chased by the farmer and his family after escaping from the pen. He's worn out, he's tired, he's crying, and now Mr. Zuckerman shows up with the pail of slop. "Come, pig," said Mr. Zuckerman, tapping the pail. "Come, pig." Wilbur took a step toward the pail. "No, no, no," said the goose. "It's the old pail trick, Wilbur. Don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. He's trying to lure you back into captivity-ivity. He's appealing to your stomach." Wilbur didn't care. The food smelled appetizing. He took another step toward the pail. "Pig, pig," said Mr. Zuckerman in a kind voice, and began walking slowly toward the barnyard, looking all about him innocently, as if he didn't know that a little white pig was following along behind him. "You'll be sorry, sorry, sorry," called the goose. Wilbur didn't care. He kept walking toward the pail of slops. "You'll miss your freedom," honked the goose. "An hour of freedom is worth a barrel of slops." Wilbur didn't care. What a profound reminder today about freedom and its importance. And we were given this through E.B. White via Charlotte's Web as 7-year-old second graders. That's just part of the story that caught my attention. But it wasn't only the story in this book that became a great example in my life of God's timing and a good book. It was the love for reading that was inspired that year through this story, the love for books that was inspired beginning that year through the wonderful teaching and energy of Miss Ledbetter. From that point on, I became a reader. I wanted to get my hands on every book that I could, read as many good stories as I could. And during that school year, later on after we finished Charlotte's Web, a school contest was started, and we were invited to participate in writing a poem or a story. So Miss Ledbetter challenged our class to participate in the writing activity, and I wanted to read and I wanted to write, and talking animals seemed the way to go according to E.B. White. So I sat down and I wrote an epic poem called Tog the Frog. And I poured my heart and my soul into it. I put a lot of thought into the story of Tog the Frog sitting on a log in the fog, in the bog. And I really just gave a lot of consideration to all of the words and the rhyming. And when I gave it to Miss Ledbetter, she was so enthusiastic. She was so excited, and she said, "We have to enter this in a national contest. There's a national contest for writing and for poetry, and we're going to enter this in." So she did, and for a few weeks I waited, and I was excited, and finally news came back, and I didn't win. And she still encouraged me, keep writing and keep putting your stories down on paper and keep writing poems and coming up with new adventures. And so I did. Later that school year, there came another contest. This particular contest was for reading. The entire school competing to see who could be the star reader of Southside Elementary School. So I got busy reading books, going to the library, checking out all the books that I could. I went through so many books that year, everything I could find. And finally, at the end of the school year, one day they called all of the kids together in the auditorium for the award ceremony for our Star Reader program. When they got to second grade to tally up the number and announce the winners, they announced my name that day as the Star Reader of Southside Elementary for the second grade. My friends in my class cheered and people clapped, but there was nobody cheering louder that day than Miss Ledbetter. I could hear her voice above everybody else as she was standing and clapping. Her little troublemaking achiever had accomplished something, and it was something she was so proud of and something that she was in great part responsible for. That first day that she walked in with Charlotte's Web began a love in my heart for reading, for writing, for creating and coming up with stories, and that has never stopped for me. Through the years, I've stayed in touch with Miss Ledbetter. I've written letters back and forth with her. A few years ago, I took my wife to meet her in Louisiana, where Miss Ledbetter lives. We had a great reunion just talking about writing and stories and poetry, and I look back on that moment and that particular year in school, and I have to say how much I appreciate Miss Ledbetter allowing God to use her to bring about another situation, another moment of God's timing and a good book, to allow God to use her to speak and encourage a young boy who was causing a lot of trouble and disrupting class, and she still invested in me and she still believed in me. I've told her this through the years, but I share this story with you today because it is another reminder. God knows where we are. God knows what He's put in our hearts to do, what He's going to develop in our lives, and He can bring the right person at the right time with a good book to step into our lives and give us that encouragement and that push that we need. That particular year, it was Miss Ledbetter, and it was Charlotte's Web. And I want to say thanks to her for investing the way she did, for believing the way she did. And she has always, ever since then, been a cheerleader and a celebrator in my life with the different things that God has allowed me to accomplish. I'm so thankful that God brought her into my life, and so appreciative of another time when He timed things when I needed them the most. I hope to see you again soon and to share more stories with you. Other books will be coming up soon, and I hope that you'll go check them out as you hear these stories and get an inspiration to get more from them. God bless you. We'll see you soon.